Chapter 8 The What? The Food and Intimacy That Keeps Us Alive. Addictions and destructive behaviors arise as a way to fill our needs, usually as a substitute to get us through some trying or stressful time. What can happen, though, is that the real addiction hijacks our biology and prevents us from enjoying the real thing when we can get it again. Louis Zamperini described seeing a fellow POW in his camp who became so stuck on cigarettes to curb his hunger that he refused food when it was finally given to him. Think of a husband or boyfriend, or wife or girlfriend, who's so entrenched in porn that he doesn't give any attention to his wife or girlfriend even when she wants to be intimate. Or an old woman who's so bitter and negative she can't enjoy a beautiful national park or an amazing sunrise without complaining about how the clouds could be better, or if only there weren't so many other people ruining the view. What about the child who's so stuck on a video game they would rather stay inside staring at a screen playing with strangers than playing outside with friends? What about someone who's entrenched with feeling depressed and lonely, but can't crawl out of bed when friends actually want them to join them somewhere? There's an incredible amount of reasons why anybody can resort to addictive behavior. The reason and the behavior may not even be related, but fortunately, they usually are. Somehow, somewhere, an imprint is made on our reflexes, our instincts, and it sticks. Like ducks following the first thing they see after they hatch, somewhere in our development, we get imprinted to some behavior that appeals to us. Since we're always developing throughout life, we're always at risk of a bad imprint. Some are imprints that we foolishly or naively chose for ourselves. Some are put onto us without our knowledge and consent. It doesn't matter too much whichever it was, the result is the same. We're drawn towards something and we may not know why. However it comes about, the responsibility lies on the affected person to overcome it. We usually need some external help outside of ourselves and our big brain to do so. We will need more than ourselves to overcome some problems, regardless of whether or not it was our fault to begin with. No one can force us to change for the better. We will have to decide or want to change ourselves. The actor and singer Will Smith does a great little video about the difference between something being yours or someone else's fault and still having the responsibility to do something about it. Our addictions may or may not be our fault, but we are still responsible for them. Sometimes we are fortunate to find a way to live with and be able to act out our imprinting in a safe and healthy way, or at least a sustainable way. We find a partner who will happily and supportingly indulge in our imprints without letting us act out in destructive ways, purely for our sake and their love for us. That's a great thing. If you were raised in a tribal setting, eating little bit grains, nuts, fruits, and a few wild animals, you'd likely be satisfied with that the rest of your life. The starkly different modern diets of many countries would be incredibly upsetting to your body and would take a great deal of time to acclimate to. The reverse is also true. If you were raised in a modern society with hamburgers, ice cream, and all the cheap chocolate you could get for Halloween, going to a paleo diet is a major life change and often one that you're never truly satisfied with. You need those cheat days every once in a while to indulge in a good donut. It'd be easy to live a paleo diet surrounded by others eating the same foods. It might be extremely difficult to live with it when your apartment is above a fast food restaurant and you smell those delicious french fries often. If you were raised in a conservative, religious home, your ideas about life will be very different from someone raised in a home without any moral restraints. Sure, you might swap some stories and ideas between each other, but not usually in a favorable light. A former Seventh-day Adventist may always feel a twinge of guilt and shame each time they partake of meat, and a newly converted Mormon may always feel that pull towards a nice cold beer. Those imprints are hard to shake. The same is true of sex and intimacy. We wouldn't judge anyone who goes from a primitive paleo diet to a modern diet. We'd expect it to happen. We praise those who can go from an unhealthy modern diet to a primitive one and never think less of them for having a cheat day once in a while. We should also never judge someone for moving from conservative values to more liberal values and morals. Many would celebrate that move and the freedom that person has achieved. We tend to expect it when someone is surrounded by it. Conversely, we celebrate it when people leave an amoral lifestyle and place several new conservative boundaries on their behavior. We usually want to be supportive of them and their efforts. Generally, we love to see people make positive changes to their lives if we know how difficult it is to do. There is a great painting by James Christensen titled Fishing that portrays a humorous figure sitting on a stool in a gray room with a fishing pole and the line hanging down into a small pail. I always treated it as just a funny picture until someone pointed out some deeper meaning to it. This character, as fictional as he is, must have started his fishing hobby the way that anyone does, on a lake or river or ocean, for the purpose of actually catching a fish. The thrill of the fight, the fresh air, the food, the peace, and tranquility might have all been good and legitimate reasons for beginning the pastime. Yet over time, the monotony of waiting for a fish to bite became the norm, and the waiting became the expected outcome of the whole ritual. Eventually, it didn't matter whether there was any fish to catch, or any fresh air or scenery to enjoy, or even if the food from the catch was needed. He fished simply for the act of fishing, of holding a rod in hand next to any body of water. Now he sits alone for hours at a time, staring at a pail, accomplishing nothing, except satisfying his mind and body for what they are used to, sitting and waiting. His life changed slowly over the years, but not in a positive way. He took the path of least resistance and less effort until his life isn't accomplishing much of anything for himself or anyone else. Taking the easy road is really nice sometimes, but it can't be the road we stay on. Remember from the last chapter, Maslow came up with a set of needs that healthy humans need. I just spent too long calling into question the importance, order, and requirement of each need, but the gist of the whole thing is that we are biological creatures and we need certain things from our environment to satisfy biological needs. Our DNA demands and expects it. But our human DNA has checked and balanced itself, or perhaps improved itself, in giving us a large brain that can see past and beyond those needs some of the time. Not even very much of the time, but that check to its power is there just enough to keep a highly complicated human creature on this planet as successfully as possible. We do need food. We do need shelter. We do need a society to belong to. We do need close friends and loved ones that we can form deep emotional relationships with. We do need stimulation for our mind and to be out of pain. We need to learn. All addictions and destructive behaviors exist because of and originally to meet these needs, either alone or in some combination. The need for material possessions, shelter, and security can become addictive. The need for companionship can become addictive. The need for sex can become addictive. The need for peace and tranquility, for self-esteem, can become addictive. The need for love and attention can become addictive. The need for food can become addictive. In short, a single biologic impulse or need can start to trump and overpower all other needs and result in your demise. Have you ever made a simple fly trap or bee trap or hornet trap? They all work like this. A container with a small narrow opening contains some sort of food or imitation food that attracts the insect. The insect smells this food and flies into the opening. Once inside, whether or not there is food, the insect cannot or will not leave because that small opening leading to their escape does not smell like food, and they smell food, so they're going to keep searching around for that food. A super simple fly trap is like this. Some lemon juice or vinegar placed in a small dish or container. Some clear wrap is placed covering it. A small hole is punctured through the clear plastic wrap. The fruit flies will smell the fumes from the dish, track it to the hole, crawl inside, and never leave. Usually they are killed by the acidic vinegar and their bodies dissolved. Gruesome, but it works very well. This often happens when we try to open a window to let a housefly out of our house. The fly is hanging out on the glass, trying to get loose, with its obnoxious buzzing and bouncing off the glass. But once we open the window, the outside air doesn't smell nearly as much like the food it wants, compared to the air where it already is hiding. So it leaves the window and starts buzzing around the room again. So frustrating. Food can be an addictive substance by itself, and I'll use it as a detailed example of how a need becomes an addiction. Buckle up, you're going to get a crash course in nutrition and diet. Hopefully, much of it is already familiar. Our body needs fuel to survive. This fuel comes in the form of carbohydrates first, fats second, and lastly, but no less importantly, protein. Think of it like this. Carbohydrates are like gasoline, fat is like diesel, and protein is like wood. We can make car and truck engines that run on any of those fuels. Yes, even wood, check it out. But gasoline and diesel work the best. Gasoline-like carbs are quick and efficient. Sluggish, but ever so dependable fat is like diesel, and also accompanied by some funny-smelling byproducts, ketone bodies. Burning protein for energy is like running a car on wood or wood gas. It works, but it's clunky, slow, really inefficient, and eventually the soot plugs everything up. Unless you're flushing it out with a gallon of water every day, I'm looking at you, keto dieters. Sweet food is made out of carbohydrates. Food made out of carbs is generally sweet on our tongue. Some carbs taste sweeter than others. Carbohydrates are made out of various sugars, usually glucose, but it could be any of a bunch of different sugars or combinations of sugars. Glucose is the most abundant organic molecule on this planet, which is why it's also the primary source of fuel for all animal life on this planet. Glucose gets attached to other things in all sorts of different ways, or linked into big chains, or woven into huge webs by various organs of our bodies. It can get packaged and stored in all sorts of ways by various plants and animals. The simpler it is packaged, the sweeter the taste, and the faster our body can digest it. Sugar is scientifically known as sucrose, among many other names, and is a glucose and fructose stuck together. They fall apart pretty easily and are very sweet and easily digestible. Lactose is the carbohydrate found in just about every kind of milk, and is made of a glucose and a galactose sugar stuck together. Maltose, or malt sugar, is two glucose rings stuck together. Starches are webs of glucose that plants use for storage. In animal muscles and livers, woven sheets of stored glucose are called glycogen. It takes different enzymes and machinery to break down and use each different kind. Some humans can't break apart milk's lactose as they grow up from childhood. Their bodies quit making the enzyme keys that unlock that type of sugar. The germs in their stomach have no problem with it, and they will gobble it up, giving off lots of gas and abdominal discomfort as they digest it. This is what we call lactose intolerance. Wood is a real tough carbohydrate made out of glucose, but we humans don't have the enzyme machinery in our stomachs or mouths to break it down. If our stomachs find wood or dietary fiber in our food, it gives the signal to our intestines to keep things moving down the pipe efficiently. So, even though it's not a source of fuel, very small amounts of wood and fiber is important to our health. It keeps the conveyor belt moving nice and regularly, if you catch my drift. Few animals can digest wood by themselves. That privilege is left to various bacteria and fungi. Cows have 4 stomachs just to house colonies of bacteria that'll break down the wood for them after they've chewed it to a pulp. Plants also store glucose for their own energy in a carbohydrate known as starch. Starches are super useful. Lots of plants store it in ways that are easy for them to consume, and it's also easy for us to consume. Grains, roots, and fruits are glucose storage containers. Wheat, potato, carrots, apples. Cook them so they soak up some water, become mushy, and you've got yourself lots of easy fuel. Mashed potatoes? Corn, or maize, is super full of glucose. So much so that it has become the dominating source of sweeteners, starches, and food on the planet. Corn syrup is free-floating glucose in water, as simple as it gets, though not as sweet as it gets. Fruit beats it out on the sweetness scale. Fruits are a plant's food storage for fructose, meant to help a growing seed have an abundance of fuel to sprout and grow, or to attract animals who will spread the seeds around and help the plant to grow. Like baby Superman's space pod that takes him to Earth, fruit is the little pod that can be dropped and scattered to help little baby plants inhabit new lands. Fructose is slightly different from glucose in shape, and that slight difference makes it a lot easier to soak it up from your food. Glucose has to go through several security checkpoints to get into your bloodstream to be used for food. Fructose is special. It gets a free pass. No special gateway enzymes and selective channels needed. You eat it, and it's yours. Glucose, not so lucky. Fructose was meant to be a seasonal thing, so it didn't matter if the security wasn't as high on it. It'll only be around for another week or two, so just let it in and let it do its thing. Because of this, fructose became an important way to pack on the pounds and store food in our bodies really fast, get us through winter and the lean months. Very important. And because it's super important, our tongues think it's super sweet, much sweeter than glucose. Have you ever seen what most bears eat at the end of summer and in the fall before they hibernate? They pack on the pounds by eating all the wild berries they can find. So what happens when big corporations, little businesses, and hungry societies figure out that with some simple chemistry, we can turn glucose-filled corn syrup into the cheap and overly sweet awesomeness that's known as high fructose corn syrup? We get obesity and diabetes. Oops. Oh, and food addictions. But it is cheap and abundant, and since humanity has always been on the verge of starvation for all of its existence until just recently, we don't like to turn away abundant, cheap food. Plus, if we have to spend more energy and money to get more food, that's less energy we can spend on other ventures, helping other people in other ways. What about fats? The other major source of fuel for our body. Some natural plant-based fats are like necessary vitamins to your body. I'm talking about the omega-3s and their relatives. They often naturally have oil-based vitamins mixed in with them, like vitamin A and E. They let your brain develop and work well. They make for good hormone balance, help with healing, and work for really efficient energy storage and calories. Your body is supposed to like fat, but it also gets overused and abused. The purpose of popular keto diets is to starve your body of any carbohydrates so that it's forced to burn up the stored fat you're keeping everywhere. Those ketone bodies I mentioned earlier are a byproduct and alternative fuel used by your body and brain, made by chopping the long fatty chains into short little burnable ketone links. In many of us, the abundance of carbs in our modern diet keeps the fat-burning machinery on hold. When we run low on carbs, we get ketosis, the breaking down of ketones, going. Our body will start to eat away at that food storage we've been lugging around for too many years. It's a great way to survive a winter or a drought when food is in short supply. It does take some getting used to ignoring the warning bells and alarms your body sets off the second it starts burning fat. It goes into emergency mode as soon as it does, warning you that you are at risk of starving if you don't look for new food soon. Nowadays, that's not really true, but those instincts and reflexes are still built into us and were meant to be difficult to ignore, for good reason. What about all the other stuff that makes food so delicious? All those things that our taste buds enjoy so much? Turns out they're all vitally important to our bodies too, in certain natural amounts. Salt? Check. Sour is the tartness that comes from plants loaded with vitamin C or citric acid. Check. Bitter? It keeps us from eating poisonous plants, but is also found in small amounts in a number of healthy plants like cabbage and broccoli, the mustard plants. We like little bits of it, but we reject large amounts of it. The last one is savory, or umami. It comes from our friend glutamate, an amino acid found in proteins. It's the taste of protein. When you taste it, it means you're eating something with protein in it, which is good. Chicken soup and soy sauce both have lots of free-floating glutamates, and along with it, a lot of broken down, easily digestible protein. Worcestershire sauce, fish sauce, also the same thing. We make concentrates of these flavors by using yeast to break down protein. It's also known as autolyzed or hydrolyzed yeast extract. Add a little salt or sodium, and you get the same effect that food companies mimic by using MSG, monosodium glutamate, salty protein flavor. How can you go wrong, your tongue thinks? Just like we talked about earlier, glutamate is used by the body, especially as a stimulant. So not only does MSG taste good, but it gives you the tiniest buzz as well. So let's imagine the perfect tasting food. Sweet, salty, proteiny, and fatty, maybe a little bit of tartness. Bacon comes pretty close. It might be missing the tart, so keep some orange juice with your bacon and eggs breakfast. How about a loaded baked potato? Ranch Doritos? Salted caramel ice cream? How about a really good cheeseburger? I think that's got all the basic flavors in there. When you eat food that's important to survival, not only does your tongue tell you you're doing a great job, but your stomach and your brain are going to tell you the same thing. Eat a super concentrated version of it, and the amount of dopamine skyrockets as well. Have you ever felt slightly intoxicated from eating too much? Eating is meant to be a social thing as well, something you do with your tribe, your family. Getting food was always a joint effort between groups of people. You get feelings of oxytocin, of love, while you enjoy the sensation of taste, and dopamine, rewarding you for a job well done, the feeling that, yes, this is right. In the end, there are lots of good things that come from eating, in addition to just living. Our body is designed to enjoy food that is good for us. Remember at the beginning of the book when I said that the second purpose of life was to eat and collect enough nutrients so that DNA can replicate itself and you can have offspring? Food and being social is super important. But when we focus on just the isolated, simple ingredients that don't do much except taste good, we fill our body with stuff that actually isn't good for us. Like having a quaint town or city, but with no buildings, just facades, all fakery and emptiness, a dietary Potemkin village. This is part of the problem with diet sodas and artificial sweeteners. Our tongue and our brain get the message we are eating something that aids our survival, but no such substance actually makes it into our bloodstream. Sweetness with no fuel. Trickery, lies, deceit. So what does our brain tell us to do? Well, eat more of it to make up the difference. So much for the diet part. On the opposite side, what happens if you can manage to choke down a hearty, heavy, single piece of whole grain bread, maybe with some all-natural peanut butter and no added sugar jam? I don't know about the rest of you, but after one of those and some water, I'm good. Pretty satisfied. It was so much work to eat that thing, and it was so energy dense, that I'm kind of done eating just one of them. I don't mean to pick on food addictions, or the foods that we all enjoy, but this is a pretty common issue in Western society that just about anyone can relate to. It's a safe example to give for general audiences, until big food companies shut me down for trashing on their products. We can find a substitute in this world for anything we're missing, whether it's human intimacy, stimulation from learning, food, shelter, family relationships, self-improvement, love, it doesn't matter. There's some counterfeit out there or something that'll help us forget we're missing one of those things. Let's talk about a big one. for many, many people in this world: sex. This thing causes a lot of problems. It's responsible for life for all advanced life forms, and it gets carried away. Pay attention the next time you're at a party with a group of friends. As soon as something related even slightly to sex and intimacy gets brought up, it takes over the conversation. Everyone's minds will very quickly perk up and have something to add to the conversation about it, or most will enjoy participating and listening to the conversation. Our brain is designed to focus on it. Thinking and talking about it is very contagious. We try to put limits on public expression of sex because it is so incredibly powerful on everyone's minds, whether we think we're enlightened and mature or not. If you don't think seeing it, talking about it, or hearing about it has an effect on you, I encourage you to look very carefully at yourself and your life. Consider someone who's cheated on a partner or spouse, even if it's as mild as checking out some porn or ogling someone walking by. Those aren't necessarily tame. You can get sex in some form just about anywhere if you're willing to settle for it or risk it. And it is settling for less and risky to get it anywhere but from a devoted spouse or partner. Though many would argue that getting something is better than the nothing they're getting from their partner. Well, touché. Still, obtaining an intimate relationship with another human being is supposed to take time, trust, effort, sacrifice, be safe, and require a large amount of vulnerability. Any false form of intimacy, whether it's from pornography, any type of masturbation, erotic literature, prostitution, the internet, illicit sex, an affair, or just a fling with no commitment involved, is much easier and requires less vulnerability. Yet it's riskier and more likely to be harmful to your health and your mental and emotional well-being. It doesn't take the same time investment, and there's little trust involved. It requires less initial effort and sacrifice, and the rewards of such a relationship are equally diminished. Often, the downsides for false intimacy come later and require much more work to deal with the aftermath. Kind of like if you ate junk food all the time and got diabetes after a decade or two. Over years and decades, your ability to feel and connect emotionally with others will have become handicapped and crippled. I understand that sex and intimacy are as complicated as I said the human brain was earlier. There are a bajillion reasons why people have some issue with sex or intimacy. It could be because of abuse, neglect, a stressful job, health and wellness issues, the result of bad information or education regarding it, curiosity that became addictive, whatever. The end goal, and it can take years for two people to achieve this, is that the two people in the relationship are working toward becoming of one mind and one heart, while keeping their individuality and respecting the others. They are willing to sacrifice some measure of themselves for the relationship or the other person so that they can build a loving relationship out of two separate individuals. This is near impossible to achieve, but many couples out there are close, and anyone can work on getting closer than they are now. True love doesn't fall in your lap like the movies show. It is built over time. Physical and emotional attraction does fall in our laps, often unexpectedly, and can be difficult to deal with when it comes on strong. Relationships are made a bit more difficult when one person isn't working as hard or doesn't see the need for improvement. Fortunately, a marriage doesn't have to be sent to the trash heap because our sex life is stinky. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. If we become convinced that our life is miserable because our sex life is miserable, non-existent, or even just hard, that might, really might, mean we have an unhealthy attachment to sex ourselves, and we'll have to figure out why. Perhaps we're jealous or envious of the apparently exciting sex lives of other people in books, on the internet, movies, or the news. What's the best solution for that one? Stop watching TV, movies, and news, and whatever else is exposing you to other people's private sex lives out of a full context. Don't throw fuel on that fire. In our home, we have pilot lights in our water heaters, our furnaces, or our stoves and ovens that are always burning, safely and serenely, a small blue flame whose only purpose is to ignite a bigger fire when we need it. It's only once we throw some fuel on it that it'll flare up into a nice flame for cooking food, warming our home, or if we're not careful, burning our house down. Our bodies have a pilot light that's always on, or at least intermittently, and for the most part, if we're not being exposed to sex, if we're not thinking about it, or seeing or hearing others talk about it, our own sex drive calms down a great deal to our pilot light mode, at least once we get through puberty. Now, when we're in a healthy, committed relationship and we are sharing a home or a room with another person and we see them in an intimate setting, that pilot light is getting some juice and will wake up real fast into a burning flame. It's almost always near impossible to try abstaining from some form of sex when you live with someone you find even mildly attractive. If you don't end up being romantic with them, your body will take control and you'll end up being romantic with yourself, someone else, something else. To continue with that, what happens if that flame lights up, but nothing ends up being fulfilled? No deed is done. Ugh, frustration. We gotta go blow some steam, satisfy the urge, or vent our feelings somehow. Maybe we start masturbating, watching porn, dressing in more provocative ways, or losing our temper. Maybe. It's better to find ways to prevent the fire from lighting in the first place by avoiding situations, scenes, thoughts, and imaginations that stoke it. This isn't being prudish or not being in control of our bodies. This is learning to control our body by avoiding the circumstances that will cause us to lose control of our body. Like others have pointed out, the old Victorian ideas of modesty and morality weren't there to be prudish or self-righteous, but to slow down the spread of syphilis and gonorrhea at the time. Any rules we develop as a society for our time will be to halt other destructive problems we are facing, and they will be similar to the measures that countless other societies have taken over the course of history. Of course, turning down the flame or getting the machinery to slow down to a low idle is very, very uncomfortable, especially when you have to do it quickly, like getting a car to screech to a halt very fast. Sometimes we need to satisfy the urge just to release the buildup of hormones. We will find some way to climax or orgasm just purely for our hormonal release. That can work for a while. If that's all we're doing, we will eventually feel empty and unfulfilled and have to move on to bigger and crazier things and more intense stimulation. At least occasionally, sex needs to be emotionally and mentally fulfilling, with a loving partner, on equal footing with each other. We need to form a complete mind-body-spirit connection with someone. It needs to fulfill all the needs for oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin, GABA, glutamate, and everything else that lights up during a satisfying sexual experience with a trusting and loving partner. This is hard to accomplish, but it is what biology is designed to accomplish. There are generalized inherent differences between men and women, and this mismatch causes a lot of troubles and seems a total mystery to the other side. He's always so horny, or she's as cold as ice, are phrases we hear because of inherent biology. Men are very often able to get in the mood quickly, while women are often only in the mood once a month while they ovulate. And for either sex, when they are in the mood, they are in the mood. Watch out. I look at a man and I get pregnant. If you've ever said that, you might want to be careful and observe what time of the month it is when you even bother to look at other men. If you're struggling with a string of bad partners, it'd be a really good idea to look at your true motivation for picking your partners. Is it because of your own unconscious urges when you pick them? No way, you're saying to yourself, my intentions were pure. Take care to remember that your biology and hormones are driving most of your decisions. Most of the time they are doing it right, and most of the time they are doing it without your input or awareness. Just like a flash flood that occurs on a sunny day from a thunderstorm 30 miles away, sex drives like to start innocently and gently, far, far away from the end goal, but they are still the motivator. For the gentlemen, dudes, and guys reading this, have you ever laid in bed at night furious, fuming, or thinking nonstop about sex or sexual things until you feel like you're going to explode or go crazy? Yeah, you gotta deal with it anyway if you want to live with others, keep your relationships, or your freedom. If you feel like you're going to lose control unless you do something, you're not alone. Dig deep, you can make it. What's the worst you'll lose, as crazy as you think you'll go? Get through the storm and you'll be fine. Better even. Don't give in. Your frustration, anger, and resentment will subside as long as you let that fire burn back down to the pilot light. And yes, you'll survive even if you don't feel like you will. Many women won't understand this. Many will. It's your burden to bear, but you have to bear it. Sometimes you'll have a partner available to help you, but don't count on it and don't always expect it. Sex is easily one of the biggest reasons for relationships to fall apart. Resentment and anger that builds over time because of unfulfilled needs is a rough problem for anyone to deal with. Frustration and resentments that build over time because of high expectations of the other person can be equally difficult and destructive. Talking about this and learning to understand each other is crucial. Learning to sacrifice yourself while the other person sacrifices themselves is what ties two unique individuals together. Imbalances will happen. Things will be unfair at times. This is life. As long as life and health are not in danger, keep trying. Staying together takes constant work and maintenance on both parts. Ultimately, the rewards keep us stable and functional, and our lives stay sustainable. How does this all play into drugs and other addictions? Developing true intimacy while we deal with this crazy world and our unruly minds and bodies is extremely difficult. If you mix in any extra complications, it becomes near impossible. Substance abuse can often start out as a result of innocent experimentation by kids and young people. Sometimes it's brought on by legitimate use of a prescription that ends up leaving an emotional or mental hole we need to be filled once we're off of it, and we need to fill it with something else. How many people try to drug with the promise that it'll make them feel good? They'll like it. Few of us have good enough reasons for avoiding something that seems innocent and will make us feel better. Having a physical craving for a legitimate substance isn't a sign of an addiction, but it should be a warning light. There is a difference between physical dependency and addiction. One is the use for a legitimate physical need, the other as a plug to fill an emotional void. Perhaps a stressful situation or period of life leaves us looking for an escape or a way to dull the pain of our surroundings. Most of these abused substances, opioids, narcotics, alcohol, whatever, have a way of dulling our senses. They turn down the volume of our frontal lobe, which is shouting at us that something's wrong. Unfortunately, with the frontal lobe turned down, our basic, primitive reptilian brain that focuses more on satisfying immediate urges and drives gets turned up. After a while of listening to the outer part of our brain telling us that something is wrong, or that we ourselves have done something wrong, we get tired of it, like a nagging spouse or parent. Just shut up already, leave me alone. We muffle that noisy conscience inside our head with anything, just so that we can live with ourselves. Oftentimes, there is a real-life nagging spouse, parent, or friend that we are trying to escape or drown out, or some emotional scar we don't know how to heal or even recognize is there. We can even become addicted to another person, or addicted to making another person better. It's easy to attach our value or worth onto the actions of another person, usually a family member or spouse. We tell ourselves, if my spouse is being dumb, it will reflect poorly on me. And so we nag and harp and manipulate and demean or intimidate the other person into behaving appropriately. Parents do this to children all the time. If my child makes bad decisions, people will think I've been a bad parent. The sad truth is that these thoughts often turn us into the bad spouse or the bad parent that we are afraid of other people seeing. By manipulating, nagging, coercing, guilting, or bullying our spouse or child into doing things our way, they often rebel in their own way and will go opposite our desires. Sometimes it's an overt outward rebellion, sometimes it's passive-aggressive and sneaky. The spouse or child slowly pulls themselves away and creates emotional distance from the situation to find their own safe space, away from the oppression. And thus, in trying to rein them back in, we become even more controlling, mean, coercive, and insulting. We become codependent. Our happiness is dependent on someone else's choices. And guess what the result of that is? More rebellion, dishonesty, lying, sneaking, anger, and reckless spouses and children, or employees, or inferiors, or soldiers, or whoever we are in charge of. Rarely do addictions form in a vacuum all by themselves. Rarely is just one person to blame, either, though the addiction is still the addict's responsibility and no one else's. Rarely does a child or spouse do these things without trying to fill some void or try to escape their situation. Sometimes that void or poor environment is self-created by the spouse or child. Sometimes they made an initial bad choice and now they're trying to escape the consequences of it. Sometimes those consequences are perpetuated by loved ones. It's a really tricky landmine-filled realm. A child that unknowingly tries an addictive substance simply because they didn't know better will retreat to that behavior or substance when life is hard, or when they have to face consequences for their poor decisions. Sometimes children will reach out for addictive behaviors and substances because of overly aggressive, protective, or neglectful parents. Sometimes a spouse will become consumed by some destructive behavior, looking for the love they think they should be getting but aren't. Maybe they really are getting it and are blind to it, or maybe they're not actually getting what they need. Each situation will be different. The most important thing is to get rid of your own addictions first, whether it's codependency, drugs, porn, food, shopping, sports, TV dramas, whatever is unique to you. Only when your own head is clear can you think logically and clearly enough to help someone else with theirs. Only then. This was illustrated in the Christian New Testament when Jesus described removing the beam of wood from your own eye before trying to remove a splinter from someone else's. This is the same idea why airlines tell you to get your own oxygen mask on before helping others with theirs. You have to solve your serious problems before you can help others with theirs. Gandhi said, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." I'd like to address a popular misconception about addictions. There's the reports of how rampant heroin use was among American soldiers in Vietnam. There were concerns about how many heroin addicts were going to come home and be let loose in the streets of America, trying to blend their lives back into society. Yet when these soldiers came home, there was no rampant heroin use. A popular newspaper article was followed by a public speech by the same author, touting that these soldiers were stressed and lonely in the Vietnamese jungles, and once they integrated back into society among friends and family, their addiction simply went away. The answer to addiction is love and connection. When rats are given cocaine water while alone in a cage, they will take the cocaine until it kills them. However, when placed in a cage with toys, distractions, and other rats, they won't touch the cocaine. He argues that humans are the same. All they need is love. There's truth to this, but it's also a quick way into a toxic relationship. I just need to love him more and he'll be okay. While this may be the case for some, in reality, a great many soldiers who spent time in Vietnam turned to alcohol to calm their turmoil once they got home. Others did get into various other substances, but alcohol was the most popular, probably because it was the easiest to get. Data was collected and articles were written up in various professional journals showing that alcoholism among Vietnam veterans was rampant. They didn't return from Vietnam as heroin addicts, but they quickly became alcoholics. Those soldiers didn't ask to be sent into a violent war, and many probably didn't know where else to get some peace and quiet other than the drugs, and many were simply never taught how to cope and deal with this kind of a situation, or didn't have the mental maturity or clarity to avoid the drugs while under that stress. No one should ever be condemned for having an addiction, but the condemnation should rest on whether the person is trying to overcome it, and what is their behavior like while they're acting on it. We can't think, like this popular article and public speech claimed, that simply loving someone enough will get them to leave behind their addictions. It doesn't work that way. We all should learn to stand on our own 2 feet. It is a lot easier when surrounded by loved ones. A lone tree left standing after the forest around it has been clear-cut is almost guaranteed to fall down during the next storm. But that tree still has to stand all by itself, even when it is surrounded by the safety of the forest. Love and connection is critical to overcoming addictions, but it cannot be a substitute. The addiction does need to be addressed and handled as a separate issue from our relationships. Some addictions are used to quiet our minds. Others are used to turn it on, because we're bored. Stimulation is common in our society, with endless sources of entertainment, news, information, and thrills. I'm not about to say this is a bad thing. This is incredible. But we can get stuck on it if not careful. Endless hours on Facebook, voyeuristic celebrity gossip magazines, non-stop streaming music, movies to no end, clickbait-induced internet surfing. Complaining and negativity can become consuming because it feels so good to criticize others. The endless need for vindication, praise, and compliments, followers, and likes can also be consuming and destructive. How many likes, thumbs up, loves, and more can we get for our fantastic photo skills and artistic craftiness? How many of us know someone who argues just to be contrary, someone who plays the devil's advocate all the time? You know, because we have to offer the opposing view all the time. Often that stems from the need to look smart or wise by seeing things differently from the crowd. It's a need for recognition. There's also the close cousin of mental stimulation, physical stimulation. That goes for the physical endorphin rush or risky behavior, adrenaline junkies. We've never had a time in our history where we can so quickly and so safely participate in what normally would be a dangerous, life-ending thrill. They're fun, and they can be consuming. When we're doing physically demanding athletic things, we're learning and our brain is being stimulated and forming new connections just as much as anyone studying and researching academic topics. There's a reason why collegiate athletes often find a great deal of success in their careers, even after they're no longer participating in their favorite sport. The brain is learning and growing whether we are stimulating it physically or mentally, and that brain growth will spill over into other parts of our lives. When we get hooked on stimulation of either kind, there's not much difference in the end result. An overdevelopment and dependence on new things that appeal to our personality. Dungeons and Dragons or fantasy football. Comic Cons or Super Bowl games. They're both great and fun, but it's easy to get lost in both. Now, it sounds like I'm all preachy that the world around us and everything in it is bad. Not at all. Sorry if I did. None of these things are bad in themselves for what they are. They are only bad when we use them badly or when they are no longer constructive to life but destructive of it. And what you or I have a weakness for, others won't. I need to learn for myself what I am weak to and find appropriate ways to deal with it. We need food and physical affection. We need stimulation. We need praise and respect. We need to be involved in the lives of other people. Participating in work, pastimes, and entertainment brings people together. Food brings people together. They all can uplift society. Retreating and hiding behind an isolating addiction or hanging out with friends in destructive behavior is the wrong path. It hampers true growth. We do it because growing wiser is hard. Coasting along is way easy. We cannot hide from pain, awkwardness, and discomfort. We cannot avoid a bumpy life. We cannot avoid others' unpleasant emotions. Feelings do hurt. A lot. Living hurts. This world hurts. Interacting with anyone is going to hurt at times. I like what Dr. Robert Glover says. They're just feelings. They're not going to kill you. Let's try to minimize it by learning the people skills we need to minimize how much we hurt each other. Not everyone will be weak to the same things. For one, alcohol or substance abuse will never even be a second thought. For others, it will be the crux of their life. For some, endless hours watching sports and sports commentators satisfy our craving. To others, it's video games or more scientific knowledge. The same can be said for others and their problems with women or food. Certain fetishes will appeal to some and be appalling to others. Preferences will come and go as you grow older, or they may persist throughout life. There is definitely a genetic component to all of these, but none of them need be a life sentence that must be brutally endured or simply given into. We get to decide who we will become. It's only a matter of learning and trying again and again. There are a great many negative things in this world that will push us toward the negative and destructive. We must learn what they are and deal with them appropriately. We can only grow food with care and knowledge. We can only stay healthy with effort. And we can only have loving relationships if we are working hard on it.